Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize someone who has been described as a pioneer in national substance abuse policy and prevention, and a woman whose dedication, drive, and compassion have made the world simply a better place. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor Mrs. Betty Sembler of St. Petersburg, Florida, as she retires as chair of the Drug-Free America Foundation after nearly 15 years of leadership. Mrs. Sembler has actually dedicated the past 3 decades of her life to fighting the war on drugs. In 1976, she was one of 10 founding members of Straight Incorporated, a nonprofit drug treatment program that successfully treated more than 12,000 young people with drug addiction in 8 cities nationally, from Dallas to Boston. Mrs. Sembler then turned her sights to establishing a national drug policy to reinforce the 4 critical fronts to combat drug abuse: education, treatment, interdiction, and law enforcement. Mrs. Sembler helped form public policy in the United States campaign against drugs through her participation in the White House Conference for a Drug-Free America, as a member of the Florida Governor's Drug Policy Task Force, and as a board member of DARE Florida, a national organization that provides drug resistance education for elementary and middle school students. Mrs. Sembler has continued her campaign against weakening drug policies and against legalization of drugs on an international basis. She serves on the board of DARE International as vice chairperson, and she accompanied her husband, Mel Sembler, on both of his missions as United States ambassador, first to Australia and then to Italy. Mrs. Sembler is the founder and board chair of Save Our Society from Drugs and of the Drug-Free America Foundation. Both organizations work to educate people about the effects on individuals, families, and communities from legalizing and loosening restrictions on drugs, while also fighting to reduce drug use, drug addiction, and drug-related illnesses and death. Mrs. Sembler serves on the boards of the Republican Jewish Coalition, Operation PAR in Pinellas County, the Florida Holocaust Museum, the Florida Governor's Mansion Foundation, the Florida National Guard Multi-Jurisdictional Counter-Drug Training Advisory Board, the Jewish Policy Center, and St. Petersburg's Menorah Manor. Mr. Speaker, in 2008, the DEA Museum Foundation presented its Lifetime Achievement Award to Mrs. Sembler for her 30 years of leadership and commitment to fighting drugs. The Lifetime Achievement Award is the highest honor bestowed by the foundation and recognizes long and sustained commitments to supporting law enforcement, drug abuse treatment, and drug abuse education. And Mrs. Sembler was awarded honorary agent status by the DEA, only the second such designation to ever be given. Mr. Speaker, the bottom line is Mrs. Betty Sembler and her work with the Drug-Free America Foundation has positively impacted lives and families around the world and has no doubt saved lives around the world. And Mrs. Sembler, with her grace, friendship, and charm, has impacted each and every individual that she has touched throughout her life, including this member of Congress. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to join me in thanking Mrs. Betty Sembler for her selfless years of service and for her work leading the charge, pushing back against dangerous drug policies and promoting public health and public safety. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Gentlemen.